The topic of my speech today is the foreign policy vision and diplomatic initiative which we are offering to the Israeli public and to the Middle East. Yet it is impossible to talk about foreign policy without first addressing the agreement signed with Iran. Like most of the Israeli leadership, I believe that the deal is problematic and even dangerous. Israel rightly said that there could and shouldn't have been a better deal. But the process between the United States and Israel around this deal was problematic and mismanaged. Our justified demands could have been on the table. The issue should have been handled entirely differently. Before the interim agreement in Lausanne, the Prime Minister and the President should have clearly defined the rules. Israel has every right to express its opposition to the deal, but it wasn't clear what was legitimate and what would be considered involvement in internal American politics. The dialogue was damaged, so Israel's ability to influence the process and the agreement was harmed. With better dialogue, Israel could have asked for and received the opportunity to examine the deal before it was signed, not after. We could have built a mechanism which provided a place for our intelligence services. We could have decided together what constitutes a breach which forces the application of sanctions, and more important, what constitutes a breach which triggers the military option. We could have conducted a parallel dialogue about Israel's security and diplomatic needs after the deal. And we could have examined together the steps to take when Iranians pumped weapons and money to Hezbollah and Hamas. We could have agreed in advance on the diplomatic cover Israel would have received at the United Nations Security Council today. We could and we should have worked as partners, not rivals. As a former member of the Security Cabinet and a current member of the Knesset Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, I truly appreciate the depth of US support for Israel. I see firsthand the American commitment to Israel. And I know just how important it is to our security. We should be grateful for this friendship. And every now and then, we should also be able to just stop and say, thank you. We should also have offered to build together with the United States something that is sorely missing, an overall coherent strategy against the Iranian threat beyond the nuclear issue, against the threat of a country vying to become a regional power through the use of terror. That's how we should have approached the issue. That's what would have yielded the best result in these circumstances. We would have weakened Iran. We would have had an impact on the agreement. We would have approached the issue from a position of strength. We wouldn't have placed the American Jewish community in an impossible dilemma of identity and loyalty. We would have strengthened the strategic alliance with the United States instead of creating a break with the administration which the entire Arab world can see. None of that happened. We can regret it, we can analyze it for the next time, but one thing needs to be clear. The deal is a fact. But we cannot allow the crisis with Washington to become a permanent fact of life. Everyone has their own account for who is to blame, but we need to put this crisis behind us. We need to start a process of healing and repairing with the administration, with Congress, with the Democratic Party, with the American Jewish community. We don't need to ask who is to blame, but how do we fix it? That's why I came to the United States at this time to begin a different dialogue. Over the coming days, I'll meet with members of Congress and public officials to work on rebuilding and strengthening the special relationship between the United States and Israel. In this dialogue, your voice is important. Your voice needs to be heard on both sides of the ocean. We need to learn from what happened. We need to ensure it never happens again. The lesson Israel must learn, with hindsight, is that if you don't offer a solution, if you're only focusing on saying what is that will not work, someone else will offer a solution for you, and you almost certainly will not like it. That is ultimately what happened with the Iran deal. That's also what will happen with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict if we don't take an initiative. The Middle East is falling apart and being reformed. Borders are being redrawn. Diplomatic arrangements we were used to no longer exist. We say Syria and Libya out of habit. But those countries in the former structure no longer exist. Radical Islam and global jihad are strengthening, accompanied by constant social unrest. The challenges before us are not simple, and the situations, as you said, appears gloomy and getting darker. 100,000 Hezbollah rockets aimed at us from the north. Russian involvement in Syria threatens our ability to operate freely in the air. We didn't defeat Hamas last summer, and we failed to start a diplomatic process of the demilitarization of Gaza in exchange for its rehabilitation. The next escalation is only a matter of time. There were sirens in the Israeli south last night. Iran is involved in every front. We will soon have, and they will soon have, far more resources to invest in terror. In these circumstances, we should lead a process that improves the situation. Instead, Israel is exhibiting a worrying trend to isolate, not to initiate, to wait without knowing what we're waiting for. We are tempted by the status quo at a time when it's clear the status quo no longer exists. In the face of the collapsing Middle East, we need to think about maximizing opportunities. We have to offer our own solution. That is the role of leadership, to offer solutions and to work to make them a reality without taking your eye off the ball. With Iran as the biggest problem was that no one managed to define an alternative solution. With the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the problem isn't finding a solution, it is the unwillingness to take the necessary steps to start the process. It is not entirely without reason. The theory that there is no partner on the Palestinian side took hold with most of Israeli citizens after the disengagement in 2005. It is sometimes hard to explain the intensity of what we went through after the disengagement. We did everything the world expected. We left the territory, we removed the settlements, and then what? Instead of building schools and hospitals, the Palestinians dug terror tunnels and fired rockets at Israeli children. After that, most Israelis believe that withdrawal invites terror. We need to fight terrorism with determination and without taking even one step back, even if that comes with a diplomatic cost. But we also have to remember the goal of terror. Terrorism seeks to sow hatred and destruction to intimidate us and to cause us to act against our national interest. We must not let them have it and have this victory. The Israeli national interest is to separate from the Palestinians, because the continuation of the current situation threatens our existence as a Jewish state. Israel cannot allow itself to absorb 3.5 million Palestinians, because that threatens everything that is important to the continued existence of the Jewish state. It threatens the Jewish majority in Israel. It threatens the character of the state of Israel. It threatens our continued existence as an advanced Western state. It makes it harder for us to fight terrorism on our borders. Sooner or later, and probably sooner, listening to Abu Mazen, I did have a chance to listen to him on the way here, on the long way here. So sooner or later, and probably sooner, the Palestinians will turn to us with the full support of the world. And they will say, we understand you don't want to give us a state, so let us vote. Give us our civil rights. They will start in Jerusalem. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians from East Jerusalem who have in their possession Israeli IDs will vote in the municipal elections. Imagine this scenario. They will vote, and we will have a Palestinian mayor of Jerusalem who, among other things, will be responsible for prayer times at the Western Wall. Then they will ask to vote for Knesset. That's their plan. They know that if we say no, we will cease to be a democratic state. We will be evicted from the family of nations. If we say yes, they'll go to the voting booth and Israel will cease to be a Jewish state. My father wasn't saved from the ghetto to live in a binational state. He moved to live in the land of the Jews. If we don't separate from the Palestinians, the Jewish character of Israel is at risk. The major question, of course, is how to separate, because others have tried. Since the Oslo Accords, there were 11 rounds of direct talks with the Palestinians. I was deeply involved in the last round as part of my role at the Security Cabinet and the negotiation team. It was a tired process with tired people going over the same old tired things. So we need to start from the beginning. Israel's strategic goal needs to be a regional agreement which will lead to full and normal relations with the Arab world and the creation of a demilitarized, independent Palestinian state alongside Israel. But we need to reach that solution in a different path. Separation from the Palestinians with strict security measures will save the Jewish character of our beloved state. Separation from the Palestinians will allow us to cooperate with large parts of the Arab world against the threat of global jihad, first and foremost ISIS. Separation from the Palestinians will allow us to cooperate against the possibility that the nuclear deal signed with Iran will increase its ability to act as a regional terrorist power. Over the past year or so, I have been advancing the regional framework proposal, which will lead to a strategic change in Israel's situation. A regional agreement will rehabilitate our international standing, bring about diplomatic and trade relations with much of the Arab world, bring an end to the conflict with the Palestinians, and be an economic and a security force multiplier. If it will allow us the opportunity to shape a better future for us and for our children. A regional agreement will change Israel's international standing and provide economic opportunities on a scale which every Israeli will feel in his pocket. Aside from the Gulf states opening for Israeli export, The Muslim world includes hundreds of millions of consumers in countries like Indonesia or Malaysia. It is a larger market than Europe and is crying out for Israeli business. They need our technology, our innovations in water tech, agriculture, and energy. The incentive for the Israelis will be huge. An agreement which will include these countries will boost our GDP and our exports. A regional approach to the conflict reflects the change in the region and the need and possibility to build a new coalition against old problems. We are watching ISIS advance, watching the situation unfold in Syria, in Iraq, in Sinai, in Yemen. It's time to throw into the trash can of history the absurd cliché that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is the source of all regions' problems. More and more figures in the Arab world understand that it is simply not true. Israel needs to join forces with those elements in the Arab world. Not only Egypt and Jordan, but also countries like Saudi Arabia, who, like us, are fighting on two fronts now, against global jihad and against Iran. Israel shares interests with them which we haven't shared before in diplomacy and in defense. The changes in the region are not another excuse for diplomatic paralysis, but an incentive to start a new path. Managed correctly, we can enlist Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, and the Gulf states. The comments made last week by Egyptian President General Sisi about the need to expand the peace agreement to more Arab states, and the responses I've heard from the Arab world to my speech at the Bar Ilan University in Israel, in which I presented the regional process, are further proof that the Arab world can be enlisted for this. One of the lessons from the previous rounds of negotiations is that without Arab backing, the Palestinians cannot reach an agreement even if they want to. Some of those countries will anyway be part of any future agreement. It is almost unnatural not to involve them in the process. Without Egypt, there will be no real solution in Gaza. Without Jordan, there can be no solution in the Jordan Valley. Without Saudi Arabia and the Gulf state, it simply won't be possible to build and finance a new Palestinian state. Naturally, the United States will serve as the principal sponsor of any agreement. Without the US, without its power, and without Israel knowing that it offers us a diplomatic and security iron dome, we won't be able to initiate the process. For the Saudis, Egyptians, and Jordanians, American involvement is a must. Russia and the European Union also have an important role to play as mediators with interests in the region. They will also help with the implementation of the process. So, how do we start? A regional summit as the opening salvo for the comprehensive regional agreement is the most effective tactical and political tool to start the process. The summit needs to be based upon a joint statement confirming that it will lead to a region-wide agreement. The framework of the negotiations will be the Saudi Arab Initiative of 2002, which was reaffirmed in Riyadh in 2007. The advantage of the initiative is that it doesn't look to reach an agreement only with the Palestinians, but full and normal relations, diplomatic and economic, with the whole Arab world. This means not only a trade zone, but also full diplomatic relationship and a joint struggle against ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Iran, and its terror proxies. Even if we don't agree to every word in the Saudi initiative, and it has problematic clauses which I cannot accept, it is an important initiative which can serve as a viable framework of negotiations. Israel should have not have left it unanswered for 13 years now. The lack of response causes the world to think that instead of looking for a solution, we only look for excuses to avoid an agreement. Despite our objections to certain clauses, the Saudis should be commended for their serious and comprehensive work and their willingness to take a political risk, and it was a political risk, and a positive stand out of the desire to lead to the end of the conflict. The initiative is the right framework through which to manage the talks. In other words, the sides agree in advance on the main thing: separation, which will lead Israel to coalesce to the large settlement blocks, clearly defined security measures, and the creation of the demilitarized, independent Palestinian state alongside Israel. To reach an agreement, the summit will need to set in motion 2 tracks in parallel, both under American auspices: a direct Israeli-Palestinian track and a multilateral Israeli-Arab track. I won't get into the technical details here, but between the 2 tracks there will be a central table, administrative in nature, which will bring relevant actors into the bilateral track according to subject and according to need. The 2 tracks will lead with the central issues: the question of borders, the rehabilitation of Gaza in exchange for Hamas decommissioning its weapons, the economy, and most importantly, security measures. The security measures, is the subject I'm not willing to compromise on. The security measures will work according to benchmarks, not a timetable, but implementation and execution tests. If the Palestinians fail to adhere to them, the entire process stops on the spot. There are 2 basic principles here. The first is that we must not repeat the mistakes of the disengagement in Gaza. The Palestinian state will not become a base for terrorism and rocket attacks against Israel. We must maintain the security coordination which exists today and allows us to operate in the West Bank to prevent terrorism against Israel. The second stems from the first. Israel's security cannot be in the hands of others. It has to be in the hands of the Israeli army and the Israeli army alone. The IDF, Israel's army, has the ability, the technology, and the strategy to provide security for the citizens of Israel. We will retain the right to put them into action whenever necessary. I tried to advance the idea of a regional summit as part of the previous Israeli government after President Abbas has rejected the Kerry initiative in March 2014. The response from Prime Minister Netanyahu and his staff was that leaders don't meet if the professional teams don't first agree on the outcome. A similar approach exists among the Palestinians and some of the international mediators. If that is the case, I ask them, why do we need leaders? Because for the big issues, the existential questions, leaders are exactly what we need. Leaders willing to step into the room and take decisions no one else can take. I want to argue something that has been proven time and again, but is still met with skepticism and disbelief and cynicism. Leaders constantly misjudge the ability of the people to accept new ideas. They assume people are far less flexible than they really are, and far less intelligent than they really are, motivated only by fear and hate rather than hope and the desire for change. History has repeatedly shown us that this isn't true. No one believed a non-violent revolution could defeat a colonial occupier until Gandhi proved it. No one believed that de Klerk and Mandela would ever shake hands. No one believed that Gorbachev will tear down this wall. Again and again, experts and the politicians failed to give their people enough credit. It is not an easy path. We need to walk it carefully and protect our security at all costs, but there is a real and viable alternative here. It offers progress in place of despair and a path to the future instead of retreat to the past. I don't dismiss being careful. It is a sensible policy which helps to protect our existence. Let's not forget that those on the other side of the table are not exactly righteous among nations. But we also need to be careful from being too careful. There comes a point when it becomes paralysis. For years upon years, we have been told that there is no chance and nothing will change. I'm offering a different approach, which will lead us to a different place. Allow me to remind you an example you all know. In 19th of November, 1977, an Egyptian plane landed at the Ben Gurion airport. People are nodding. Standing and waiting on the red carpet was the Prime Minister of Israel, Menachem Begin, the late Menachem Begin. Begin was a leader of the nationalist camp, a man of the political right, but first of all, a real leader who knew how to take difficult decisions. The orchestra began to play, the door opened, and the president of Egypt, Anwar Sadat, stepped off the plane. It was a dramatic, theatrical moment. There were brief secret talks beforehand, and only 10 days before his flight to Jerusalem, did Sadat announce to the Egyptian National Assembly that he was traveling to Israel. His foreign minister resigned in protest. A few days before the event, the Israeli chief of staff and the head of the army intelligence warned the Israeli government that Sadat was concealing aggressive intentions. It has been nearly 40 years since then. We have an effective agreement which survived all the upheaval of the region. Those 40 years stem from that one inspiring moment. That moment allowed both nations, Israel and Egypt, to break free from decades of limited thought. It allowed them to imagine their life if a peace deal was signed. From that moment onwards, the leaderships in both countries received widespread public support for compromise. They could reach an agreement. When the leaders were willing to act like leaders, their people joined them. I have 3 children. I believe most of you have children and grandchildren. We cannot look at our most difficult challenges and just pass them to the next generation. We owe our children more than that. My generation of Israelis cannot leave them a country that faces an operation in Gaza every year, hundreds of thousands of rockets aimed at us from Lebanon, and increased international isolation. We have to do everything so that our problems do not become their inheritance. We can bring about change. We must answer the challenges to guarantee the existence of the Jewish state. We don't need to hide from the future. We don't need to fear the future or see it as a threat. We need to create our future and determine our own fate with our own hands and with the help of our American brothers and sisters who are sitting here today. Thank you all, and God bless.
Thank you very much. That was a wonderful speech. I think we'll all remember that for a while. You've laid out a vision really not just of a new Israel and a new Middle East, but of a new world, a new, more peaceful world order. What I want to ask you is, how do we get from here to a regional conference? So pretty much almost everybody agrees it's a good idea, except maybe in Israel, where it's not clear that they're willing to go along. How do you convince a government that you don't have great relations with to sign off on attending and taking part in an important regional conference?
First of all, I do not disqualify taking over the government.
Well, all right, well, let me ask you that. How soon could a new elections take place in Israel?
Well, I have an office in Tel Aviv in the Yigal Allon Street, and in the office we have a big board, you know, like dates, and there's a pin, a yellow pin on November 1st, 2016, and down there it's written Election Day. Because it has nothing to do with peace process. It has to do with the fact that they have just passed a budget that will make it impossible for them to pass the next budget. It's the same as what happened in 2012. The way we see it, we're going to election next year. And it's going to start as an election about domestic issues. And it's going to end up as an election about the choice between fear and hope. Now, I'm not sure, even though I wish I could say, you know, hope always wins, but it doesn't.
Yeah, it usually doesn't.
I don't know if usually it doesn't, but not always. Yet, I think there is, I mean, when the Israelis will feel that there is an alternative, that it's not coming from the left. It's not the same, the usual suspects who always said, you know, and it's talking and using a different lingo, and says this is a Jewish path, and this is a security-oriented way of approaching things. I believe I'm aiming my entire career and party to the fact that the Israelis will give it a try, because they understand the alternative is terrible. As I was saying, the problem we have with the... I made it into a rule never to attack Netanyahu when I'm abroad. Not an easy task, but I made it into a rule. So, I would say the following. I do think that the Israelis do understand that part of what happened with Iran and part of what is happening with the Palestinians is the fact that there is no real alternative. My role as opposition is to make sure they understand there is an alternative. Otherwise, we are playing a Me Too politics, and you always lose when you're playing a Me Too politics, because if Israeli politicians pretend to be a Netanyahu lookalike, then the Israelis will vote for Netanyahu. If the Israeli politicians will say, yes, we have an alternative, it's not coming from the left, it's not passing on the kind of security Israelis are entitled to, I believe the Israelis will go for it.
Are you in a better position going into an election a year from now, 14 months from now, with a regional conference having been teed up, say next spring, Netanyahu rejecting it, and then being able to go to the Israeli public and say, the world was ready to move forward, the only thing standing between moving forward was the current Israeli government?
Well, one of the problems, I don't think the Prime Minister is even going to reject it. He's just going to hum himself through it. I mean, saying, well, we'll think about it, we'll see.
Should they go ahead without him?
I think this is what we are doing right now. Last night here in New York, I have met with Prince Turki of Faisal, which I think you know very well, who is from Saudi Arabia, used to be Minister of Intelligence and Ambassador here in Washington, discussing the regional summit and the possibilities that we can explore together in a regional process. So, and tomorrow I'm going to go to Washington to discuss this with people in Congress and Senate and the administration. This is what you do. You're doing the groundwork, and you're saying now the government, there are two choices. Either the government will pick on this, which is okay. I think it was Harry Truman who said that there's no end to what someone can do if he doesn't seek credit for himself. So I don't care about the credit, it's too important. So if this government will take on it, I will cheer and support from opposition.
Is it better for the prospects of a summit, both inside Israel and out, if it's called the Saudi peace plan, or if it's called something else? Or would it be easier to get everybody together if it was not called the Saudi peace plan?
Well, you know, when you are in the position of trying to, it's not, I don't want to say sell new ideas, because it's not a selling thing. It's trying to tell people what is the right thing to do. There's always a combination of temptation and threat in which you say, you know what, I will be misinterpreted. And if I say Saudi initiative, say, yeah, you see, we have exposed him for what the left he really is. He wants to divide Jerusalem. He will say yes to the right of return. This is all wrong. And I am not, and this part is part of what happened to Israeli politics in the last decade. People were so afraid of the soundbite, they were not willing to say anything concrete. But I have more faith in the Israelis and their ability to digest ideas, as I was saying. And I think if we will respect them enough by telling them, yes, it's called the Saudi Initiative, this doesn't mean you have to, you're going to have 5 million Palestinian refugees coming into the land of Israel, because we will never accept this anyhow. Or I'll give you another example, which is even more easy. The Saudi Initiative talked about the Golan Heights. Now, even if we would, I'm against returning to the Golan Heights in general, but even if we wanted to return the Golan Heights, you have no one to return it. Who do you return it to? I mean, Hezbollah, Jabhat al-Nusra, Daesh, ISIS.
So let me ask you this, Phil. Like, how does the United States respond to all this talk about a big regional conference? And you mentioned 1978 and the Israeli-Egyptian deal. That was brokered by Jimmy Carter at Camp David. It wouldn't have happened without Jimmy Carter. Is there a role for the United States in basically taking ownership of the Saudi plan, calling it the Colin Powell plan or whatever, you know, something else, so that people can come together and have a historic conference on that basis?
So let me say a couple of things about that, but to start by applauding Yair for even bringing this up, for even talking about it in Israel and here. Because, as you said, Jonathan, you made a little joke about, you know, sometimes it looks darkest just before it goes totally black. You know, doing Middle East over the past couple of years, we've often said something similar. Just when you think it can't get worse, it can and does. And in a way, the Palestinian issue, at least compared to Libya and Yemen and Syria and Iraq, has been the dog that hasn't barked. I'm not saying it's, you know, going swimmingly. There's periodic violence, but it's not a war. But it could be. And that's why, and I worry when there's an issue in the Middle East that we just sort of put on the back burner and don't talk about. I even worried a little bit, the last couple of Israeli elections, including the one in which your party did so well, were won on domestic things. These were not peace process elections. People weren't talking about it. And yet, as you very strongly pointed out, the trends are not good, and over time, these 3 million Palestinians are there. And as I asked, and we've been asking the Israeli government, how are you going to answer those questions? And again, I didn't hear what Abbas had to say today, but when you play this out, at some point, my sense is that Palestinian impatience rises to the point where they have nothing to lose. Abbas, who at least has supported relations with Israel and nonviolence, is gone. And then there's some real open questions. So it's a long way of saying, but I really think it's important. It is a really good thing that Israeli leaders are talking about this and bringing it up. As for the specifics and the regional approach and the U.S. role in it, I would say that the regional approach is necessary but not sufficient. By which I mean I agree with every argument about why it is a positive approach and how it could be good for Israel to have relations with these countries and why getting their backing will be necessary to make it happen. but it's not sufficient if anyone thinks it can somehow be a way to get around the direct negotiations with the Palestinians that need to happen. These Arab countries, including Saudi Arabia that first put this forward, are never going to impose some solution on the Palestinians. They're not going to get out in front of them and drag them to the table and make them sign something that we might all agree on. So I think it's necessary, I think it's positive, but at the end of the day, we still have to get back to the very hard issue of Israelis talking to Palestinians and supporting these, sorting out these issues themselves. But the elements that Yair talked about, which include separation, and I'm sorry, that raises some really difficult issues, but if it doesn't happen, we have real questions about Israel's future.
So are we likely to have a summit on Syria that Putin wants before we have one on the Arab-Israeli conflict?
I think so. And I wouldn't complain about that at all. I mean, Syria is an urgent, burning issue that's destroying the entire region, and I, as you know, advocate for such a summit, and I think we should. I don't think they're mutually inconsistent.
Could one be a predicate for the other?
It could, in the same way that the Iran deal wasn't meant to be a model for anything, but nonetheless showed that certain great powers can sit down with Iran and make a hard compromise that ultimately they conclude is in their interest. It's hard not to watch that and say, well, maybe a similar hard compromise could be done over Syria where nobody wins totally. We didn't win totally on the Iran deal. We, at least in my judgment, and many of us here, got enough to satisfy our interests, and that would be a model for Syria too, and it would be a model, because the region needs that. I mean, so long as it is so bitterly divided in so many levels, it used to be Israelis and Arabs. That's moved down the list of divides, and I completely agree that right now the Arab-Israeli conflict is not driving regional dynamics, but Sunni-Shia sectarianism, intra-Sunni sectarianism, so absolutely, if we build on the Iran deal and then there is a regional summit that deals with Syria, will that not help set the stage for something on the Palestinian issue? I think it would.
Why do you think it's so hard for the Israeli public and the Israeli political establishment to understand what's in its long-term interests?
Well, it has a lot to do, as I mentioned before, with the disengagement. And if I may, I want to repeat the fact that I don't think it's sunk in, even in the States, even to people like the people in this room, how traumatic it was for the people in Israel who are pro-peace. I mean, the fact that there could be a process in which Israel evacuates settlements, leave the area, doing everything we were supposed to or told by the world to do.
Except not lifting an embargo on Gaza, which made it very hard for Gazans
let me remind you
lead
that
normal lives.
the fact that Hamas rose into power in Gaza has nothing to do with the embargo. And now, I'm not saying we should learn from this not to do anything. This is the opposite of what I was saying. I'm just saying, I think the human nature is that if you have a small fear that is close to you and a larger fear that is further down the road, you will go for the closest fear. So this is what is happening to the Israeli public. They say, yeah, you're right, 10 years from now. But if you look back 10 years, look at we had a very different Middle East. We had this, so it wasn't urgent enough comparing to the urgent fears, and there's some education to be made. There is some explaining a process that needs to be implemented in order to explain to the Israelis that actually the bigger fear that seemed to them further down the road is already here.
How about a medium-term fear, which is Iran and ISIS? And your point that the only way to unify, to contain Iran and confront ISIS is to do it with Arab allies, and that Israel and the United States can't do it without regional allies. And you can't get those regional allies as long as the Arab street is still upset about a resolution of the Arab-Israeli conflict. Is that too much of a, what they call in pool, a bank shot, to...
It's for pundits. It's as I was saying, there's a lot of explaining and detouring that you have to do in order to explain this. You're right, of course. And as Phil was right, talking about the fact that he didn't say it specifically. Basically, there's a new mechanism. The P5+1 is a mechanism. There's a new mechanism circling now in our region, and people will use it because it worked once for them. I mean, I look at it differently, but it doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. So, and if we need, part of the reason we need to initiate is because someone else will initiate for us unless we do something. I mean, no one here can admit to the fact they know what President Abbas said in the UN, because this will be admitting that you were looking at your phones while we were speaking.
Somebody?
Yeah. But, yeah, sure. But he was saying horrible things, including what he said, that he declared a cancellation of all written agreements with Israel. Nobody understands right now what does this mean in terms of the security coordination. But this can have this is medium term. On the medium term, this can have horrific conclusion on the Israeli security, on Israel's security. So it's there. It's already there. The one thing we should tell the Israelis: okay, you thought you have 10 years or 15 years or 20 years. No, we are. As a country, as leadership, you have to do things that has to do with 15 years from now. But beside that, it is here. And since it is here, we have to do something about it.
I want to ask one more question before we open it up. This is for both of you. AIPAC was dealt a pretty stunning blow. They spent $20 or $30 million trying to defeat this deal. Does this set AIPAC back in any kind of a semi-permanent way? Does it reshape the way American Jewish opinion works? And is there a sense in which it was just a bad move strategically for both the Israeli government and AIPAC to not realize that they had lost, really, because of the rules of the Senate, even before this began?
So I did raise the point earlier about wondering or asking the question why the Israeli government decided to put so much into an effort to kill a deal that most political analysis suggested wasn't going to be killed. Let alone what I raised about the consequences, even if it were somehow killed, even though the Security Council and all these other countries supported, I think there would have been consequences there. But the more political question you're asking is, why put so much effort into a losing battle? Did they not know it was going to lose, which is a poor judgment about U.S. politics, or did they want to do it anyway? And so the question I raised about the Israeli government, I think, applies to AIPAC as well. The only thing I would say is, as you, I think, alluded to, what it shows is that they didn't represent the entirety of Jewish opinion on that subject. According to public opinion polls, the opposite was the case. So, one conclusion can be drawn from it, to the extent that anyone thought there was a monopoly of the pro-Israel view or the Jewish American view. There wasn't, and that has become clear in the wake of how this played out.
Did Ron Dermer, Ambassador Dermer, and others completely mischaracterize American politics to Israeli officials? Not only did this pass, but it didn't even require a veto by President Obama. It passed by a lot, and it was obvious to anybody who, like me, covers American politics from the moment that the deal was signed and absorbed that there was virtually no chance politically that it would be defeated. So did they just not understand that in Israel, or were they so emotional about it that they wanted to fight anyway, almost as a matter of principle?
If you'll hear a big bang on the back, it will be my spokesperson fainting from the fear I will answer these questions. I will not comment on the ambassador's behavior in Washington. Well, it was as a former journalist, it was a nice try. So I will say, the thing about AIPAC, I mean, it's interesting because as an Israeli, I am thankful and doubtful at the same time. I think the problem was not with AIPAC. The moment AIPAC was specifically asked to do so by the Israeli government, I don't think they had a choice.
Right.
Because either, I mean, if not, why does AIPAC exist to begin with?
Right.
So I think now as the life being what it is, when you are throwing yourself into battle, then battle has its own course and pulse. So maybe they became too enthusiastic on the way. It's not for me to tell, but I don't think they had a choice. Listen, we're going into election year now. Senators, congressmen, they're going to need AIPAC. I think AIPAC is going to restore its power, and this thing is not on the table anymore. So hopefully the damage is not internal.
Okay. Yeah, we got time for a few questions.
Thank you all. Jonathan and Phil obviously raised quite a few clouds and doom and gloom, Mr. Lapid, appropriately. And my question to you is, you also touched on confluence of interest between Israel and its Arab states. Indeed, the IPF, through wonderful programming summer, had a number of former Mossad heads who all said there's never been a greater shared interest and destiny with those countries. Do you really see seeds of optimism, and how do you convert that, not just through conferences, into achieving the two-state solution that we all would like to see?
Well, there's always two levels of cooperation. Let me give you an example from this country. Even in the worst days of the Netanyahu-Obama conflict, the cooperation on military levels is maybe at its best of all times. The same goes with those Arab countries. Yes, we have all sorts of dialogue in all sorts of levels. But this doesn't replace political leadership, the ability of the leadership to talk. And I mean, there's no one is going to save us from ourselves, us the politicians, from ourselves. We were elected or not in order to be able to take risks, calculated ones, careful ones, in order to improve the world. This is, you know, when people ask me why did you go into politics, I always answer the same with the same cliche. I said, because I want the world to be a better place. Okay, and now, well, everything else is tactics. So I think there is no alternative that will. I mean, the people who are old enough to remember the process before the Oslo Accords are carrying with them the myth of those professionals, this group of young professionals who behind the scenes made it all happen and then brought it all packaged to the leadership, and the leadership just signed. This is not true. This was Rabin's ability to make great decisions, great difficult decisions, knowing that he might even pay the highest price, which he ultimately paid. So I wouldn't be too optimistic about the fact that we can talk on professional levels with the Saudis or the Egyptians. It's finally it is always two guys or two girls or sitting in a room talking to each other and coming to a conclusion.
And maybe a third person. I would urge people to read this book, 13 Days in September by Lawrence Wright, about the Camp David Accords. It's a wonderful eye-opener about what it really takes to make peace. Yes, I'm sorry. You're next.
Thank you very much. The withdrawal from Gaza is always put in the following way. We left and now they're shooting at us. I wonder why it wasn't a negotiated withdrawal. So there could have been some quid pro quo. You could have built up Abbas, made him a partner to the... It had so many wonderful ramifications, and it seems to me it was a lost opportunity. Could you explain this to me?
Well, actually, I cannot, because I think it was the wrong move. I think, as I was saying, we don't want to repeat the mistake of the disengagement, which is leaving the territories without a signed agreement, and with the dialogue and before it, and the compromises that has to be made. So, and for example, I think in Israel's best interest is the fact that we want to maintain the security coordination, and you cannot have that after withdrawal unless you have an agreement. So, like you, I think it was a mistake, and I think we should not repeat this mistake.
Just to go in the back a little bit, yes. Oh, I'm sorry.
Great.
Good, we got to get a reporter in here. Important.
Hi. Yeah, as you referred to, so we did hear that President Abbas said in his UN speech that the Palestinians would no longer be bound by the Oslo Accords, and I'm wondering, what do you see as the implications of that? I mean, is this the dog that is, trying to bark when all the other dogs in the region are barking? Is it a couple of years ago we had the Palestinian, using the speech to declare the Palestinian state, and that didn't go anywhere. What's the point here, and what are the implications?
Well, first of all, if we're going into President Abbas's speeches, he started it by terrible words of incitement about what is happening right now in Jerusalem that has nothing to do with the truth. It's just complete sheer lies for propaganda purposes. And nobody really understands right now, we're talking like a few minutes after the speech, what does cancellation of written agreements means, if it means anything at all. It's just another sign of, unhappiness, I guess, or something of the sort by the Palestinians. And they are frustrated. I think, like most Israelis and maybe most of the people in this room, that their frustration has to do with their own doings. But this is an expression of frustration, and it's too early to tell what kind of... I mean, the security coordination up until yesterday was working pretty well. So I hope this is nothing to do with this. I don't think it has nothing to do with this, because the security coordination also has to do with the stability of President Abbas's government itself.
Thank you so much. Peter?
If I may, on behalf of the Israel Policy Forum, I want to thank all of our panelists, Yair Lapid, Phil Gordon, Jonathan Alter, and really giving us a fascinating conversation.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.